This is Dockside, 19 stories, harbour views, Charleston's most recognised residential address. But on February 27th, 2025, every resident received an order to clear out within 36
Dockside
hours.
Association and the City of Charleston evacuated residents from condominiums and townhomes due to concerns with the condominiums' building structural integrity.
The floors were never strong enough to hold the people living on them. $151 million to fix it. Empty floors, no refunds. How does a 19-story tower stand for nearly 50 years before anyone admits the floors are dangerous? Who kept signing off on million-dollar sales while the load reports were already on file? Why did some residents receive private letters telling them to move their furniture while others learned the truth from the evening news? And who made the call to keep all of it quiet? Dockside went up in the late 1970s on the Charleston waterfront. 112 condominiums stacked 19 stories above the Cooper River with open water on one side and the city's low historic rooftops on the other. For decades, it held the title of Charleston's tallest residential building, and it was one of the last high-rises approved before the city capped how tall new construction could go. That made it something close to irreplaceable. Owners took pride in it. The harbour views commanded serious prices. The address carried weight. That was the plan. Here's what actually happened. Dockside was built using a flat-plate concrete system. Picture the floors as flat concrete slabs sitting directly on top of columns with no supporting beams in between. It is fast to build. It is economical, and when the math is done correctly, it works. The weak point is the exact joint where each column meets the slab above it. Push enough load onto that connection and the column punches straight through the floor the way a pencil pushes through a sheet of paper. Structural engineers call it punching shear failure. It does not creak, it does not sag. The joint holds its position right up until the moment it does not. And when one joint fails, the floor above drops onto the one below, adding its full weight, overloading the next connection and repeating all the way to the ground. Engineers call that chain reaction progressive collapse, one level at a time. Later investigations traced the deficiencies back to original construction, and the first sign did not show up until the SALT had been working on it for decades. The building wasn't just aging, it was misbuilt. Nearly 50 years of SALT air had been doing quiet work on Dockside's concrete. By 2015, corrosion had reached the balconies, the exterior walls, and the parking deck below. Chunks of concrete were loosening from balcony edges. Repair crews rebuilt 191 balconies, repaired the garage, and installed cathodic protection systems to slow the rusting of the steel buried inside the concrete. All while residents stayed in their units, with climbing platforms running up and down the facade. But while fixing those balconies, engineers found something that had nothing to do with SALT. The original builders had placed the reinforcing steel in the wrong position. The balconies had been structurally weaker than designed from the day they were poured. Repair crews had to add supplemental reinforcement to bring them up to the required structural capacity. If the builders got the balconies wrong, what else did they get wrong? That question got answered in 2022, when a contractor renovating a single private unit opened a wall and found a problem with the column to slab connection. The Dockside Homeowners Association hired SKA Consulting Engineers, a multidisciplinary structural firm with a Charleston office to investigate. The inspections required demolition to parts of units. Many owners refused access. SKA was only able to examine roughly 16% of the structure. Even that limited view produced a clear finding. The problems traced back to original construction, not gradual wear. The building had been built with deficiencies from the start. SKA recommended temporary shoring and occupancy limits. It stopped short of calling the building unsafe to live in. The early concerns about the columns and the floors were now officially on the record, written down, filed away, and not acted on with any real urgency. Then it gets worse. By early 2023, the situation had reached city officials. In January 2023, Mike Julizadeh, Charleston's chief fire marshal, wrote in an email obtained by the Post and Courier through a public records request, We need to notify our first responders of the conditions, the weight limitations, and we'll need to make sure they visit the site to review the potential impact the shoring may have on operations. The floors were already under enough stress that he was not confident fire crews could safely enter during an emergency. The following month, Ken Granata, Charleston's chief building official, sent a formal letter to Dockside leadership, warning that if the city could not be assured the building was safe for first responders, it would move to evacuate. In March 2023, the board hired a second firm, Wiss, Janney and Elsner, known as WJE, a national construction engineering firm that had investigated the Champlain Tower's south collapse in Surfside, Florida, which killed 98 people in 2021. Following WJE's initial walkthrough, the Dockside Association sent private letters to at least 7 unit owners, instructing them not to fill bathtubs, remove bookshelves, and relocate sofas. The letter read, "We apologize for any inconvenience, but trust you understand that this is an action we are required to take to help avoid mandatory evacuation of the tower," according to documents later obtained by the Post and Courier. The rest of the building's residents received no such letter. Later lawsuits and reporting allege that buyers who closed during this period were not informed of the load restrictions or the ongoing assessment. And here's the part nobody wants to answer. WJE spent nearly 2 years conducting a full load capacity assessment of the building's 18 residential floors. On February 25, 2025, they delivered their conclusion to the Dockside board the building was unsafe for continued occupancy. The calculated load on the concrete slabs was already near its limit from the ordinary weight of furniture and residents alone. The engineers could confirm the problem in specific spots, but warned that locations they had not been able to reach were probably just as deficient. There was no way to point at 3 units and say the danger lives here. The danger was potentially everywhere hidden inside a building people were sleeping in every night, which is why the only fix available wasn't construction at all. It was subtraction.
The Dockside Association and the City of Charleston evacuated residents from condominiums and townhomes due to concerns with the condominium's building structural integrity.
I read the email and I got a little upset. It said that basically the city has said that there's a mandatory evacuation of the building.
The fastest way to take stress off those overloaded floors was to remove the weight, and the heaviest variable weight in any residential building is the people and everything they own. The next day, the city ordered everyone out by 5 p.m. on February 28th. Roughly 36 hours. Personal belongings could go, the furniture had to stay. Because the furniture was now part of the problem. The townhomes at the base and the shared parking deck were ordered emptied too over fears that a collapsing tower could bring the deck down with it. More than 200 people lost their homes in a day and a half. Not ideal for a place that had been somebody's idea of a safe retirement. A lot of them were older residents who had spent years building quiet routines inside that building. The neighbor who checked in every morning. The friend 2 floors up who drove them to appointments.
I've lived here 3 years and I love it and I'm not moving.
36 hours dissolved all of it. A dollar figure on concrete and steel is easy enough to calculate. The rest of it does not convert. All of it came with a price tag. The estimate to shore up the structure, remove asbestos and retrofit the column connections came to $151 million, roughly $1 million to $1.5 million per unit. The insurance carried by the Dockside Association was not the kind that covers original construction defects. Claims were denied. The repair costs landed entirely on the people who lived there. Some were paying $5,000 a month in temporary housing while still carrying a mortgage on a unit they could not enter. Units purchased for around $1.1 million in 2023 were listed afterward at roughly half that. Others traded for $90,000 to $120,000 when they sold at all. Think about the choice that creates. Pay a bill larger than the unit was ever worth to repair a home you've already been kicked out of. Sell at whatever price you can find, or walk away from everything you put into it. On August 14th, 2025, the combined tower and townhome owners voted. 132 out of 133 rejected the repair bill. In December 2025, the Dockside Association Board filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing nearly $14 million in debt, mostly tied to estimated demolition and cleanup costs. A Florida-based real estate investor had offered $30 million for the entire property before it was formally listed for sale. The board rejected the offer, stating the property was worth significantly more. Nobody who approved the original construction lost a dollar. Nobody whose decisions kept buyers uninformed in 2023 has been asked to cover any part of that bill. The people who lost everything were the ones sleeping inside. One construction floor buried in 1970s concrete erased $151 million in value. And Dockside is not the only building with this problem.
The property management company for the Riverview condo building overlooking the Charles River says it discovered structural issues. People who live there had been told they need to move out, or at least start moving out as soon as Monday.
Well, after that, they tried to come up with a plan to fix the building, but found out that is not possible.
The Riverview condominium on Mount Auburn Street in Cambridge, Massachusetts was evacuated for the same reason and has since been ordered for demolition. Units there followed the same pattern properties that sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars before the evacuation order traded for a fraction of that price once the structural reports became public. Steve Bentz, owner and director of restoration at Repair and Restoration Engineering, a Virginia-based structural engineering firm, reviewed structural reports from both buildings. His assessment provided to the Post and Courier punching shear failures and inadequate reinforcing. It just appears that Cambridge was more severely inadequate than Dockside. Thomas Sputo, a structural engineer and emeritus lecturer at the University of Florida's Department of Civil and Coastal Engineering, reportedly described the situation as an epidemic. Thousands of flat-plate concrete buildings from the 1960s through the 1990s, built when the design was common and codes had not yet caught up. The joint holds until it doesn't. You just don't know which building it is yet. What remains disputed is not whether Dockside had serious structural deficiencies by 2025. That part is now clear. The harder question is who knew what when they knew it, and what had to be disclosed to owners, buyers and residents before the evacuation order. The city knew the floors were under stress by February 2023. The board sent load restriction letters to selected owners by March 2023. WJE was assessing the building for nearly 2 years before the final letter arrived. Those questions are now being fought through lawsuits and bankruptcy proceedings. Here is where the story splits. One side says the board acted within its obligations. Engineers had not declared the building unsafe, the city allowed continued occupancy, and no law required disclosure of ongoing structural assessments to prospective buyers. The other side says that when your own fire marshal is writing about weight limits for emergency crews and your board is mailing furniture restriction letters to selected units, every person paying a mortgage inside that building is owed a direct conversation, not a quiet letter to 7 owners. Both sides will be argued in court. Nobody who made those decisions is being asked to justify them anywhere else. The project you just watched took years to fail publicly. The next one on this channel took longer and cost more. Subscribe, because by the time it makes the news, it's already too late. Comments are open. Name your city.